found yesterday, and I don't know what the deal was, but we are working to make that a lot better all the way around. So I apologize. Let me get right into the message so at least you get the meat of what was going on. I want to start with a question today. Do you know what a first world problem is? First world problems are small, relatively insignificant annoyances that irritate us. These are problems of affluence, not scarcity. Let me give you some examples. Starbucks makes your coffee wrong. Your favorite sports team loses. The power goes out at your home. Your car breaks down. Your phone battery dies. The Wi-Fi is slow. You get a bad haircut. You see, first world problems cause irritation, not devastation. These are times when I allow these first world problems to annoy the fire out of me. In fact, Monday of last week, as I was preparing this message, one such problem crept in. I don't know about you, but I hate when customer service reps are rude. I've had a recent issue with some blood work, and just out of precaution, my doctor wants me to see a specialist. So the referral was sent out, and I had not heard from the specialist's office, and it had been almost 2 weeks. So I picked up the phone and I called them. After waiting on hold for 15 minutes, they answered. I let them know who I was and why I was calling, and then I was told, the new patient coordinator will call you and set an appointment. Great, I said, that would be fine. Any idea on when that might be? Do you want to guess at what their response was? We are extremely busy. We will call you when we can. Then click. They hung up. Dial tone. No one's there. That was annoying. Now, not all problems are first world problems. If you live long enough, you will go through seasons where the problems get much harder, more painful, and more emotional. There will be times when everything seems to fall apart. We all go through these seasons because terrible things are part of life. We get laid off, our businesses fail, our marriages fail, a loved one dies, we get a horrible diagnosis. Our sons or daughters go to war, the economy crashes. These things happen outside of our control. Life punches us in the stomach so hard that we collapse and wonder how we can go on. Sometimes everything falls apart. We're going to look at the Gospel of Luke today, a story where Jesus is in the temple with his disciples. We're going to read the entire story, and then I want to give you some historical background so we can grasp the enormity of the events. Jesus says that it will happen in their lifetime, and then, as always, I want to make a few observations because what Jesus does here, both in his teaching and in his life, it gives us a clear path forward when everything falls apart. And we're going to discover something extraordinary about the eternal nature of God, which can fuel us forward starting today. So let's get started. Turn with me, if you would, to the New Testament. We're going to look at Luke 21, 5 through 19. It says, some of his disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and with gifts dedicated to God. But Jesus said, as for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of them will be thrown down. Teacher, they asked, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign that they are about to take place? He replied, watch out that you are not deceived. For many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and the time is near. Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will seize you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and put you in prison, and you will be brought before kings and governors, and all on account of my name. And so you will bear testimony to me. But make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you will defend yourselves. For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents, brothers and sisters, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but not a hair of your head will perish. Stand firm, and you will win life. You see, our story begins with the disciples admiring the beautiful stones adorning the temple. This was Israel's second temple. The first one was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC. This temple was the center of the Jewish faith, and it had been under construction for years. The cost was enormous, both in money and manpower. Now, the story takes place in the year 33 AD, and this temple that they were in currently, it wouldn't be finished for another 33 years in 66 AD. See, the scope of this project was incredible, and the disciples were admiring its splendor. Jesus interrupts their admiration by saying something unthinkable. Soon, all of this will be destroyed. The entire temple, everything you see here, utterly devastated. Not one stone will be left upon another. It will be a total loss with no chance of repairs. The disciples were shocked. Can you imagine what was going through their minds? How can this be? This is the place where the true God dwells. How can this beautiful, strong dwelling place for the Almighty be reduced to ashes? We know it happened once, but surely it won't happen again. They asked when. When will we have any advance warning? Jesus responds, here's your warning. Everything will fall apart. You'll see wars, natural disasters, and famines. You'll be arrested and thrown into prison. Your closest friends and family will turn away from you. You will be hated. And oh, by the way, some of you will be put to death because of me. All right, here's some history. Jesus is not the first person in the Bible to predict that the temple would be destroyed. The prophet Daniel, hundreds of years earlier, also prophesied. In Daniel 9:26, we read, after the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death. And that, of course, is Jesus. So the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. So what happened? In the year 66 AD, there was an uprising in northern Israel. The Roman Emperor Nero sent his army to squash the rebellion, and this took 2 years. Afterward, in 68 AD, the army turned towards Jerusalem, surrounded it, cut off commerce, and tried to starve the city. But the people did not give up. In 70 AD, another 2 years later, the army finally broke through the city walls and they slaughtered whoever they found. Historians note how ruthless the army of the Romans were. People were killed on the spot. The few who survived were sent away as captives to be used as sport in Roman arenas. One soldier threw a flaming board into the temple, which caught fire, and other soldiers followed suit, and they killed everyone attempting to defend the temple. 6,000 men, women, and children who were sheltered in the temple courts were murdered. The temple burned to the ground. And when Jesus said not one stone would be left on another, that was true. You see, the gold and precious metals throughout the temple became so hot that they melted and dripped onto the rocks between the cracks. And the Romans later turned over all the stones in order to loot the gold and the silver. Everything fell apart. So there are some important takeaways from what Jesus taught. The disciples were listening, and he taught them that day while sitting in the temple. We're going to talk about a few of them. Number one, we are not in control of the events of life. Who do you know that needs to hear this? Is it you? We are not in control of the events of life. Each day we experience hundreds of things that are completely outside of our control. We can't control our height, our natural eye color, or our skin color. We sure can't control what other people say or think about us. We can't control the weather. And as parents, we can't control our kids, no matter how hard we try. Why is this, you ask? Simple. Because they've been given free will, just like us. We can influence them, but ultimately, we cannot control them. We cannot control the economy. We cannot control the stock market. We cannot control other drivers on the road. Church, control is an illusion. One of the surest ways to become a miserable person is to fixate on the things you can't control and then try to control them. When Jesus spoke to the disciples about everything falling apart, there was absolutely nothing they could do about it. They couldn't stop wars, famines, or the Roman army. They couldn't stop their family from betraying them. They couldn't stop the authorities from imprisoning or martyring them. Jesus is saying that bad things are going to happen that you cannot change. And when these things outside of our control happen, we have a choice, which happens to be number 2. We will react or we will respond. To react means to act impulsively out of fear, anxiety, anger, or some other immediate emotion, while to respond means we still feel that emotion, but we choose an intentional action. We intentionally respond with faith or courage or patience, no matter the situation and regardless of how we feel. God never wants us to impulsively act out of fear, anger, or anxiety. He wants us to act in faith, courage, and patience. Our emotions should be our servants, not our leaders. Our emotions are valid and we should listen to them, but we must not impulsively act out of them. People who respond well to the uncontrollable events of life, they choose to respond with faith and courage. You see, to react is easy and it's our default setting, but to respond, it's a skill that takes practice and help from the Holy Spirit. See, we are not responsible for our first thought or emotion. We are responsible for our second thought and our first action. Church, let me say that again. We are not responsible for our first thought or emotion. We are responsible for our second thought and our first action. Have you ever had something that you could not control? No matter how hard you tried, nothing you did would work. Sure, we all have. Well, let me tell you one that I had, a time when I couldn't control a situation. You see, many of you know that I spent 16 years in the car business long before I started what I do now and of course, starting the church. Well, at this time, I was the finance manager of a dealership, and I was asked to do something that was unethical. It was immoral. If I did it and got caught, I was the one that could be arrested and sent to jail. My ethics would not allow me to do this, and I knew that. But I was devastated that I was asked to do it in the first place. You see, I worked for a believer in the car business, and it was really hard for me to comprehend why I would be asked to do this. So on that Friday afternoon, I left the dealership knowing that I had to respond by Monday. I had to give them my answer. And I talked to Karen about it. We prayed about it. I went to church Sunday morning and I prayed that God would give me some type of sign, knowing that I was making the right decision. Nothing. We went back to church Sunday night. And as I was praying at the altar, crying my eyes out, asking God to give me a sign, a man named Bill, he came up behind me, put his hand on my shoulder, and says, I have no idea why God is telling me to tell you this, but you are released. You may leave. At that moment, I knew that God was in control. You see, I could have freaked out. I could have reacted, but instead, I responded. I talked with Karen. We went to the Father because we knew He was in control of everything. And the next morning, I walked in with my head held high, and I gave them my letter of resignation, and I wished them well. So when Jesus teaches us how to respond when everything falls apart, what is He really teaching us to respond with? It's number 3. Patient endurance. See, when everything falls apart, we respond with patient endurance. In our text from today, right after Jesus lists all the terrible things on the horizon, He looks at His disciples and He says to them in Luke 21:19, by your endurance, you will gain your lives. In the King James, it says, in your patient possesses ye your souls. And the NIV says, stand firm and you will win life. Stand firm. Where have we heard that before? Stand firm. The Greek word in the original text is hypomeno, which is better translated as patient endurance. Jesus teaches the disciples and us that the path forward when everything falls apart is patient endurance. Church, patient endurance is to be our response to the events that we cannot control. We're not to react out of fear, anxiety, or anger, but instead, feeling those feelings, we're to choose an intentional response of patient endurance. The early church was well known for its patient endurance. They were patient because they believed that God Himself is patient. God is working patiently throughout the centuries to bring everything under the headship of Christ. And they believed if God is patient, then we should be patient too. Author Alan Creeder, in his book, The Patient Ferment of the Early Church, describes in great detail how early Christians were primarily known for their patient endurance. This was a stark contrast to the world around them that had little faith and by default little patience, because faith and patience are two sides of the same coin. The early church grew steadily, and Creeder points out that there is no mission strategy, no focus on evangelism. There were 3 essays written by the early church fathers, and all 3 of them were about patient endurance. Jesus teaches us to respond with patient endurance because God Himself is patient. This is good news because patience is part of God's eternal nature. God is not anxious. He is not afraid, surprised, nervous, fearful, or stressed. As Jesus laid out these future events, there was no anxiety or fear in His voice. God is a non-anxious presence in our lives who helps us to patiently endure when everything falls apart. We can patiently endure the hard things of life because we have a non-anxious presence abiding within us. Jesus says, stand firm and you will win life. Patient endurance and you will win life. One final observation, and I didn't make it a point, but it's interesting nonetheless. You see, as the disciples were admiring the beautiful stones adorning the temple, Jesus had been admiring something completely different. Let's look at the beginning of the chapter. Luke 21, 1 through 4. It reads, as Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. Truly, I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had to live on. You see, they walked into the temple and the disciples noticed the impressive architecture, but Jesus noticed the poor widow. What was the poor widow doing? She was patiently enduring the hardships of life. In her life, everything fell apart. She lost her husband. She was living in grinding poverty. But Jesus noticed her patient endurance, and she still gave everything she had to live on. When you think about it, everything was about to fall apart in Jesus' life too. Betrayal, abandonment, a trial, a conviction. He was about to be whipped, beaten, crucified, and killed. And how did Jesus approach this culmination? He patiently endured it all. He endured death in order to overcome death. He gave his life for the forgiveness of sins. Hebrews 12:2 says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. He patiently endured the cross. Patient endurance is part of God's eternal character, and he sees us in our struggles. Church, not only does he see us, but he is also with us. So remember, we cannot control the events of life, but we have a choice. We can react or we can respond. Jesus teaches us to respond with patient endurance. And God sees us and is helping us along the way. Do you remember the nursery rhyme, Humpty Dumpty? Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Church, don't be Humpty. The next time everything is falling apart, don't turn to your emotional support animal. The next time everything is falling apart, don't turn to man. No. The next time everything is falling apart, turn to the one true King. He alone has the ability and the power to put it all back together.